Nothing like a spider's brood crawling out of your mouth and all over your face to wake you up from a big long nap. Ah, hello there. I hope it wasn't waiting too long. You know, while I was, pickling in there, I guess you should call it, I got pretty into survival games. I think it's the whole being a preserved-ass corpse-ass thing. Where games about dudes trying to outrun the inevitable tide of death speaks to me on a fundamental level. Age, hunger, and several things with loads of teeth? Well, dingle dang if you can't craft axes and shovels out of wood your way out of that. Who among us with enough stone flint chisels can outrun the many forms of death? Not based on my many failures, deaths, and games over in these games. No one! The stride is doomed to fail. But ultimately, the choice to run is the petrol of the car that keeps us doing alive. Yeah. Among these kind of games, there's been a recent contender that felt like it came out of nowhere. Vampire Survivors. Ah! A game so good, it makes you do a little noise. Feeling like it just out of nowhere in late 2021. It's a perfect blend of thoughtful and thoughtlessness. A game where you walk about, but are still under the pressure of making constant small decisions to your loadout and positioning. A game that's still going, with big expansions still being released to this day for a whole £2. To add to its already gargantuan Muso-esque checklist of things to do with your walk and choice. But this thing has been out for a year and a half now, and that's plenty of time for people to take their own stab at the concept. While Vampire Survivors has its own lineage, with being based off Magic Survivors by the devs of Mission, I'm excited to see Vampire Survivors start a design lineage of its own. And oh boy! And of course it has, like, was there any doubt? They're already making a TV show out of the thing with no dialogue or story! If you're there, there's going to be people inevitably wanting to get a bit of that pie. And while that's normally just objectively depressing news, I found 4 games for us today that all seem to, at the very least, want to spark something of a conversation with the original text, instead of just making it again. So we'll be looking at 4 Vampire Survivors, which is a cursed phrase that I hate the sound of when it exits my mouth. It's, but also I got nothing until something comes up with something better than action roguelike, which also feels awful coming out of my vocal cords and mouth. I hate it. What does it mean? It could mean anything. It could even mean rogue if you think about it. There's nothing rogue-like about rogue. It's rogue. Action is occurring in the game. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Let's start with our first one.
Welcome to Intermission.
Renfield, Bring Your Own Blood is oh god, no, not again. They're doing it again! No! Oh, Christ. To keep this as brief as possible so this video doesn't become 7 years long, this is round 2 of Universal Studios trying to MCUify their Universal Monsters branding. The first attempt being the Dark Universe. Get ready! Dark Universe. If I stay ready any longer, my blood pressure will deplete and I will leave this world. In fact, these attempts go far as back as 2004's Van Helsing, and they just never work. And spoiler alert, this one also did not work. But my god, God bless them, they tried. They even put the lead up of the 2017 Mummy movie commissioned Way 4 to make Mummy Demastered, a retro-style Star-Scroller, which was pretty good. Perhaps the most memorable thing about all of that, and the tweet is very funny. It's still up. And every year we unite, get together to point and laugh. Oh, how embarrassing. Surely they wouldn't do that again. They're doing it again. They're doing it again. So they're doing it again with this new Dracula film, and oh no. But at the very least they learnt, well, rather in their lack of learning, to commission someone cool for the tie-in game. The choice this time was actually kind of bespoke, because who better to commission for a retro-style indie game than a studio that's currently developing Sega Mega Drive and NES games in our Lord current year. This is Megas Cat Studios. Also, it's a Vampire Survivor-like. And thank God, get me away from this subject. I will obsess over this branding failure for years. Anyway, good thoughts. Good thoughts of success and joy. Let's go through for all the little changes to the formula that Renfield presents us. Your first notice is four-way running. Woo! Look at him go in all directions, all four of them. Not only is that an aesthetical change, but it also influences some attacks in the game, as like your initial claw swipe being aimable up and down, instead of needing to get a secondary power in order to do anything in the vertical space. However, immediately we're running into a bit of a crinkle, because as you can see in this footage, nothing else in the game moves this way. None of the, oh, they've let themselves go, Scotland and Pilgrim mooks. And it feels like a bit dickheadish just to be like, they put in too much effort in the graphic. Like, it's cool they did it, but perhaps the original game didn't do it for a reason. As your PCs in that game never look, what on earth would you say in this situation? Animationingly divergent to the enemies? So that's, I hate, that's another noise I hate leaving my lips. Thank you, Renfield. But you see, it's been like 2 seconds of footage and we've already gone over a little change we can talk about. I find it so interesting. It makes these titles seem like less like a jumping on the bandwagon or a crash cab, but something that legitimately and earnestly wants to engage in dialogue with the original text. Renfield says, I don't like that we're required to maybe randomly get a power up to attack in this space with our starting character. We should be able to attack there immediately. It may seem like so nothing or so within its own context that it kind of doesn't matter, but it's saying something. Is it prose that'll make you rethink the mechanics of your entire life? No, but it made me think about what I did and didn't like about Vampire Survivors, and I think that's the most a licensed title has made me think about anything ever in my life. Did Sega's Iron Man make you think of anything besides the cold void of death? That's a point to Renfield. Now, I'm sorry if this makes me a bad reviewer or an analyst, but I've not seen the source material that this film is based on. I mean, no one did. So I kind of have no context about the next thing I'm about to praise, which is the little grouply dudes on the floor being your EX meter, as opposed to the crystals in Vampire Survivor. But even if I don't know why they're there, I like them. I like that they slowly grooble towards you, making up for a lack of an attract or power-up in this game, at least in my playtime. Oh, and you may have noticed it in the footage, but a small thing to mention is that power-ups don't discriminate between a weapon and a passive buff when they're presented to you outside. Maybe the first choice is always weapon, but then after that, you could just kind of get anything to level up. Another thing, and it's a thing I feel unifies the games we're going to be looking at today, is the game having additional inputs rather than walk and choose. Renfield has supers. Look at that, a little meter. And if you fill this super meter, you can press a button for a full screen nuke. Just giving you another thing to do during a run, even if it's just a press of a button, sometimes, not all the time. The game is also structured differently, as opposed to the initial goal to survive for 30 minutes in one map. Renfield has multiple screens in the stage, with a set amount of enemies that need to be defeated until you can move on to a different square of the map of your choice. After a few of these, increasing in difficulty each time, this allows for like some minor thing of strategy of like where your next screen is going to be. Perhaps there are certain obstacles that are particularly disadvantageous to your setup that you might want to try and avoid or encourage. After a few of these, increasing in difficulty each time with new enemies, more things that shoot projectiles in the case of this level, you get to a victim, in which case you're presented with a choice of how to end the run. You can choose to spare the victim and make your run last longer and more difficult, or you can harvest them to make it to the boss fight immediately. This wrinkle of choice is great. It's very interesting, as the stronger your character becomes via your unlocks and your upgrades to their stats, with the money you keep after you die in every run, it may enable you to take the harder moral choice as the game goes on, while initially taking the easier morally dubious choice at first. It makes you think about the choices and the walking while you do them. I gotta be honest, with my hour with this game, I never got past the first boss, who gives me big Enter the Gungeon vibes. It's something about how the bullet hell looks and the pace of the fight just kind of gives me that feeling, which is interesting. It makes you contemplate the question of how much the twin stick shooter DNA is kind of in this style of game. I mean, in regards to that question of overall what genre you consider Vampire Survivors to be in anyways. And we're going to put a pin in that because it is going to come up later. And that's kind of the game. I will say, compared to the source text, the game is way stingier on unlocking new power-ups. In my hour and a half of playing, I unlocked 1. But it's clear there's 2 other stages and at least more characters to unlock as you play on, with more content being added to the game even as I write this script. So, I don't know, maybe this has been resolved, but it wasn't in my playtime at least. So what's the verdict? We're not going to be negative, because it's a great game and I'm definitely going to come back to it sometime. But I cannot fathom the mind that looks at a game like Vampire Survivors and says, that looks at the ingredients of what makes this thing and decides, but even this is far too much. Like 200 things to do? No thank you. Is this videos game or my part-time at Asda? At my local creamery. For me, what makes Vampire Survivors' simplistic gameplay works is the complexity that surrounds it. While yes, it's a walk and choice game, that's your main 2 things. There's so much going on under the hood. There's 20, I think, 15 or 20 different stats that make up the difference in each character that you're buffing with the passives that you choose, as well as just an exhausting checklist, which is, yes, completely removed from context. That's a lot of things. But within this simplistic system and gameplay setup, it really thrives. You may just be walking and choosing, but your mind, whilst playing the game, within the game, is always paradoxically preoccupied constantly by the long road of things that you will eventually have to do to even make a dent in this gargantuan checklist. But that long road will eventually get you to the game's end state. Like, the game is still simple, but there's meat on them bones, Its simplicity works because there's just so much spice on the pie. Do you like these food analogies? So hey, 4-way walk animation, great. And the constant mini objectives as opposed to just doing the one big one with things changing. It's good, but despite these bids to keep my attention, I often found it waning because it's so stingy with its power-ups. Every power-up I gain in between runs, in Vampire Survivors, even the smallest upgrade to defense, health, power, feels sudden and immediate. The results of buying an extra point in defense can just be felt and contributes to a feeling of progression. You get closer to the 30 time limit, you're able to survive, you'll be able to get more EXP gems. But with this, it's I spent so much raising so many stats, and the game just felt fundamentally the same. I was just dealing with the same toolkits and nothing really changed. I just am as much in the shit as far away from completing the game on playthrough 1 as in playthrough 5. Hey, maybe that's why the End of the Gungeon vibes come from, huh? But that feeling of progression is kind of everything with a game this simple, right? And I definitely had trouble motivating myself to keep going after this initial playtime. Oh, this is so negative. I'm gonna come back to it, and it's gonna be great, and it's gonna be fun. And honestly, maybe you really are the person that looked at Vampire Survivors with its 200 thing checklist and was like, I'm out. If so, they made a game for you, and it's really good. So cool. You should definitely pick this one up. Because to be honest, the whole movie tie-in thing, it's definitely one of those I have no reason to believe this is good when it's a movie tie-in and chasing the trend, but it's good. Like I said, they're still updating the game as we speak, and maybe I'll check in on Renfield at a later date. I don't know how this game ends, but then if it has Dracula in it, then it will beat its source material into adding a vampire to survive against first. Sacrilegious! Hey, if you thought that meeting a vampire eventually at some point was sacrilegious, try after your first input from the title screen. Here he is! Scarlet Tower. Now this is a game at the complete opposite end of the spectrum of our previous game. If Renfield argued that Vampire was way too complicated with its progression system, then Scarlet Towers argues it was not complicated enough. Even though this game is still currently in early access, Christ, where do you start? Despite this first scream implying that with just 7 playable characters, there may be less content than in original Vampires, you look a little further and the truth becomes evident. Oh, dear God! Each character starts with a unique starting weapon to upgrade from a choice of 3, a unique passive from a choice of 3, which requires a secondary currency for buying the weapon. That first thing costs yellow currency, this is perp currency, and those characters can be up to one of 4 races which have their own passive buffs and upgrade trees. This costs red currency, that's a different currency from those first 2 currencies. Keep up, oh, that's just 2 screens, we got more screens than that. And on this screen we have equipable offense and defensive passive buffs separate from all of the above with the ability to purchase more choices in each 3. Thankfully this is just with yellow currency and purple currency for the more choices. And then when, maybe 70 years after you started and you've unlocked all of the above, there's even a gachapon screen with the in-game currency, all 3 of them you can use to craft equipable items too. Well, at least you just pick a stage and go. Nope, on top of this, stages have 10 variants difficulty levels that each can be, meaning they have 10 base variants, and of course there's more than one stage. So I guess everything is done via currency, there's no achievements. Or you fool! You think we wouldn't consider meritocracy its own currency to add to the pile? There's of course achievements that unlock new weapon upgrades and the aforementioned other characters. Oh. Holy shit! I was talking smack on Renfield for thinking vampires was way too complicated, but man, this is intimidating as hell. The game opens with these screens that I'm this gives me the same feeling of when I triple dipped into Hyrule Warriors and then started looking at all the map screens to clear again and just I've had no retakes. I'm just gonna keep that little noise in because that is the noise. But this is good. If you ever thought Vampire Survivors was too simple, good news. There's a game you can play for the rest of your life. I don't know if you thought 3 currencies, hypothetical 4th currency was enough. Well, during the runs, there's another currency. As your kill count counts as its currency that you can spend in an in-game store during the run. Whew! And this is all before you press start to do the bloody thing, like, God. But aside from that, the runs themselves stick very much to a similar format to the source material. But there are some minor changes. Runs now only last 24 minutes as opposed to 30, which may seem like a buff for the player. However, they are now split in between day and night sections, with the night sections being the only time the purple currency is dropped as far as I know within my playtime, which is a great bare minimum requirement to gate upgrades. Like, stops that feeling of a run that ends prematurely being for naught, at the very least, if you can make it past the 12-minute mark. Like, it's pretty interesting. In the first level, for example, it also changes the enemy roster, with the main goober going from zombies to werewolves, who do attack more aggressively. But we'll get to the subject of enemy variety in just a second, because we have to go over the big change. It's a change that doesn't affect the gameplay too much, but it does recontextualize where your brain is at while doing runs in this thing, and that's the ability to toggle between automatic and annual game. What the fuck was that? Aim! Annual aim. Sorry. First scripted thing, the Essexian accent is coming through strong here. With the press of a button, you can use the second stick to determine where your character's automatic attacks are going to go. You may think this is a straight up just good thing, just keep it on. But I feel they balance it pretty well, as not every situation calls for direct aim, and it does rob of your character's ability to use all of their weapons attacking in multiple different directions. And when you're using manual aim, the cooldown between attacks, you really start to feel it when you aren't covering your 6 with some kind of automatic, like, passive thing. It's definitely something when you first use it, it just seems like an automatic, oh man, I wish the original game has this, and then you swiftly learn why it doesn't. But the choice is nice. I think the choice is better. It's in these situations of either and or, to choose is always the best thing. So it's not busted, it's well balanced. But that feeling I was saying before in Renfield about like, oh man, this reminds me a bit of a twin stick shooter. This feels like it absolutely affirms that, like, oh, that pedigree is definitely in the DNA of these Vampire Survivor games. I mean, it kind of just makes the game a twin stick shooter, really. And this sort of begs the question, are these games, have they always been twin stick shooters, but the computer is doing the second stick for you? But then have all twin stick shooters been based around this concept of surviving? Are they sort of a part of the survival pantheon this whole time. I mean, I think about my first game that technically counts as the twin stick shooter. Probably be like Alien Breed for the Amiga, which is absolutely a survival horror thing. Wait, is that why they have all these games that have gothic horror sort of elements? Because they're secretly horror games the whole time? So many questions that Scarlet Tower brings about these games. But I kind of like this. I like this sort of clashing of like previously established genre ideas as we try and sort of conceptualize what it is the Vampire Survivor like even is. And as more get made, it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse within this video. Oh, good news everyone, half of my notes seems to have disappeared, so ad-lib time. Woo! So if this goes full rambling immediately, that's why, and sorry, I don't know what happened. So another thing I also like about it is how much your sort of default weapon is prioritized, is maybe the word. Not only does it kind of get its own little category in the upgrade section of the game, also your character is animated to be continuously using it, which is kind of cool. We would have to wait a whole year in Vampire for a DLC update that included a goober that moved. Also, much like Renfield, this also feels like it has more proper bosses, which isn't automatically a good thing. But I do feel like this game handles it better than Renfield because, well, it's more of a nuisance. I guess that's the only way I can really vocalize it. Just comes on the screen, is big, is just throwing stuff anywhere, it's getting in the way of you collecting EXP gems. Just a real nuisance. Which I suppose when you're doing enemy but a little worse, it's a good way to do it. It's a method. So this is like great. I'm excited to see where this game goes when it reaches 1.0. As it stands, it has some of the same issues of player retention just because it is so dense. I'm not really sure what it is I'm looking forward to in terms of unlocks, if that makes sense. Though it does not suffer from Renfield's, like I upgraded something and I don't know what's changed. The progression feels immediate, similarly to the source text. Also, there's a problem with enemy variety. On my first few rounds, the level of enemy variety is quite lacking. There's typically only 4 goobers per day or night cycle, and those do not change every minute like in Vampire Survivors. You're going to be in the same situation for several minutes, and it's not great. I know it seems like most enemies in Vampire Survivors are the same, and again, it's one of those things I thought I took for granted in the original text until it gets taken away, and then you immediately get why they did it like that in the first place. Like, yeah, the enemies are very different, but there's only 4 of them, and that's 24 minutes is a long time with 4 guys. But also cool to think of that. This is what I mean when I say these games have conversations with their source material, and those conversations sometimes just affirm what you like about the original text. Like, I wouldn't have said that the 9 million enemy sprites was a part of the secret source, as it were, but yeah, kind of is. But this game's been updated all the time. By the time this thing goes out, it may have already been solved, or it's just something that gets solved as you unlock more difficulty levels. So, but in my time, yeah, but overall, game fucking rips. You're gonna be playing it forever. That's great value. This is like a third of the price of Renfield, and yet this looks like a time consumer. It's so meaty. There's so much meat on the bone, so much stuff to see. As it slowly comes out of early access, there's just gonna be more beans, meat, beans. You get this metaphor is gone. Just get it. Just get it. So on the 18th of August last year, something strange happened. A stream suddenly appeared on YouTube by Sunsoft Corporation, announcing new products, hosted by a VR chat Gaijinka Avi of the logo, which is okay. Now, Sunsoft still being around after all this time, despite not developing games, isn't really in itself too weird. They've been very active in licensing out their IP to studios during that whole time, making sure their games stay in circulation via virtual console and services like that. But the last 5 or 6 years has been significant. These endeavors have been very good, with both Inting Creaties developing the phenomenal Master Blaster Zero trilogy, as well as companies like Limited Run Games doing reprints of their older titles. Oh, and just Googling it, they just also do a lot of other stuff with them, like books. That's it, books. So with these successes, I guess Sunsoft wanted to get back into game development proper, and thus Sunsoft is back! Stream is here. They announced the limited run reprints of Gimmick and Euphoria. alongside a brand new title being developed internally. Iki Unite. What's really funny about this section is that they have to go into the history of Iki's notoriety and popularity in Japan, which ensues having to go into detail what a Kosoge is, and that their game is one. Oh, I do not envy the anthropomorphic Sunsoft logo's job here. Sunsoft games were unique in that everyone hated them. But I guess when someone else took the mantle of remaking your good games, I suppose this is it. This is all you can do. But let's take a look at this new game and, oh, do you see it? Yep, this Iki revival is in fact a Vampire Survivor-like, which is very surprisingly contemporary for this kind of reboot thing. However, to fit the circle peg in the square hole, there are many shake-ups to the formula that had to have happened to get this one to work. The biggest addition being it's cooperative. This is something I'd love to see in the source material too one day, although so much had to be in this. What was that supposed to convey? I wasn't kidding about the spider nest in the brain. I'm rotting. I'm dying. I can't think. They had to change so much to get co-op to work, so maybe they just can't do it. But the reason co-op may work for Iki Unite is because the goal here is not passive, but active. When you start a round, you are placed somewhere random in the game's pretty elusive map, and are instructed to track down and defeat a boss within the time limit. Doing so moves you on to the next objective, so on and so forth until you finish the game. Oh, a post-edit correction. I've been placing these impressions off my personal playthroughs, which I feel like if I didn't experience it in that, then hey, I only played it for an hour. But I feel like I would be amiss to not mention that the co-op isn't just for 2 players, it's for 16 players online. Which is nuts! Yes, Iki's gameplay loop is inherently arcadey in nature, encouraging you to get as far as you possibly can with your single life. And there's no rogue elements either, nothing carrying over from one playthrough to the next. But there are also items in this game, but to get them requires clearing small Muso base-esque challenges involving defeating a set number of enemies in a small area. It's up to the player to balance the time for these challenges while leaving enough to complete the overall main objective. Another difference is, well, if you haven't got all 16 of your squad with you, you can summon an ally who will follow you while using that character's starting weapon. And oh yes, characters. Obviously with 16 people co-op, there is at the very least 16 characters. But there's a few more than that. They're also all unlocked from the start again for the co-op thing, I imagine. Now, if you've played the NES original or the arcade release, you may be thinking to yourself, was there even at the minimum 16 guys in this? It seems as if there was a vaguely human-shaped sprite collectible or anything in an Iki anything at any point in history from the games to small promotional image. Well, they're probably here. Play as Kissy Lady with power to big kiss. This one is wild and diverts the most by a significant amount. It's clearly inspired by the Vampire Survivors format, but staunchly does not want to leave or compromise on its arcade game identity and origins. So we're kind of left with a slow, gradual version, but under a strict time limit, of something initially fast-paced and reaction-based. It's weird. But despite how much this should sound like a mess, I still really like it. The audacity of this messy thing to exist in our world is kind of admirable. The context of old hat game developer getting back in the ring with something as contemporary as they think of is like, it's charming. It's like, it's cool. It's cool. This is a thing that exists. And I feel like there is something here for fans of old arcadey kind of games like this and of Vampire Survivors. At the very least, it provides a new experience for fans of either. So I recommend you take a look at it. I'm not sure how this thing did, but it seems to have been successful enough to warrant a subsequent stream, a Woolly World style remake of Euphoria, which is like pre-Neo. Godspeed Anthro logo, man. Friends, ooh-wee, this is the one. When you make these kind of videos, it's just mostly out of intrigue, you know, you're just sort of like, I wonder what's going on with these things. They must be making these kind of things. I wasn't ready to fall so deeply in love with a game during something like this, but this is it. All the others have been showing us pretty neat things, but this is it. This is the big burrito, the 7 cheese pizza, the 7-pack Jaffa cake that when you open it, there's 8 of them. It's the big boy. And I'm gonna say it, I think if this is the one I actually like a little more than vampires, if I'm honest. Bone Razor Minions, funny name, is a vampire survivor-like developed by Kaisware, I think, who as a developer seems to typically make games in stylistic 2s, with Bone Razor being the second one after Skellefest, which is another arcade title which involves having to finish a huge Zelda Dungeon-esque map in one run, with a combination of melee attacks and a gun you aim like a twin-stick shooter. Oh, would you look at that? The comparison has come up again. Weird. Bone Razor's contribution to the Vampire Survivors format is so slight, so simple, but genius. It kind of changes everything. Instead of having your player character being the one that does the auto-attacking, getting weapons, becoming stronger, instead you summon little skeleton dudes who do the attacking for you, with weapons being replaced with the ability to summon new guys or strengthen your current ones, and passives becoming all about extending your survivability or being able to tilt the RNG of level ups in your favour. But your Bone Riser isn't completely hopeless. This game actually offers the most buttons to press do out of all these games, which is 2. That's 2 little things. That's 2 little buttons. As your do can both dash and accumulate spells they can use. In general, Bone Razor, despite sticking the closest to the Vampire Survivor mode, actually comes across as the most mechanically rich and different of the bunch. If Vampire is just about walking and choosing, then Bone Riser is running for your life and choosing again, choosing, and maybe after 10 choices you could run for your life again. Just kidding, more choosing. It's like, it's not just that you can summon dudes and power them up, but you can also fuse them together, like fuse 2 of melee class skeletons to make a giant skeleton of that class, or a Meldus minion, which the same thing, but they're small and weird. You can also push your little skeletons beyond the typical level cap of 3 to a 4th level, then become demonic. And if you want to fuse a demonic guy and a giant guy to become a demonic giant guy, you can do that. And every time you summon a skeleton, you can also, there's also a chance you can summon small skeleton. And you get enough of those and you can fuse them to a big one too. What I'm getting at is that you are constantly making these choices and considering the makeup of your army during every playthrough, as there's no limit to how many skeletons you can raise, but there is on everything else. At the place I'm currently at, I can only summon 6 giant skeleton dudes, 3 demonic ones, etc, and stuff like that. It's limits like that. Do you bet the farm on 1 strong dude, or wait until there's enough mooks to support the sudden disappearance of the 3 strong units you have to fuse to make the big guy? It somehow achieves this balancing act of not becoming any more complicated than vampires, but making sure it's as mechanically dense with that same level of complexity as it can possibly be without bursting at the seams. Just always thinking, always using your noggin. But with all the summonable guys, what about being guys? Well, this game's equivalent is classes, which take any single wrinkle of Bone Riser's mechanic and just decides, what if they're really good like at that bit? You start off with a class that's really good at summoning the microskeleton dudes, and you unlock more just based on what mechanic of the game you wish they were better at. Can only summon 3 demons? Okay, there's one class where you can summon like loads and do it really fast. Can only do 3 spells? There's a guy that can do 8 spells. Passives? This is someone that gets passives all the time. Your character recovers health naturally? Well, someone could do that way quicker. That's such a great approach to a class system. I love that. Just being able to decide, I either want to be even better than I already am, or I suck at this part. Can a class make up for that weakness? It's great. But what about the playthroughs themselves? Well, in Vampire, there's a crinkle in your upgrade paths where you can actually make the game harder for yourselves if you become too strong enough. This manifests as in a stat, actually. It's the curse stat. This is in the game because the only way to get stronger is to collect EXP from enemies, so it makes sense that if you want to get stronger quicker, you drop more enemies, thus more EXP, thus you'll get to where you want to be faster in your very specific limited 30 minutes. However, what Bone Riser decides to do with this quirk is just fantastic. It's not just a stat, it's kind of the whole game with its own upgrade tree and everything. So here's how it's going to go. On your first playthrough, you're going to be mad. the game is going to seem really unfair. The premise of the whole thing is that a king of a nation is sending his guard after you. Humans, which are classed as meanies in this game, they get more powerful as time goes on, as it would in any vampire-like. You start with the peasants of the town, which then goes to the town guard, and oh, you've already died immediately. What the fuck? You may shout. There wasn't enough bones to collect to get strong enough between wave 1 and 2. How are you supposed to do this? Ah, but there's the wrinkle that Bone Riser gets in and makes bigger wrinkle. Alongside being able to upgrade your PC with the money you collect on your playthrough, you can also upgrade your enemies. But here's how this manifests. This includes adding monsters waves in between the waves of meanies. So your first upgrade is a band of rioters that seems to fit in between the peasants and the town guards. And now suddenly, difficulty spike isn't so immediate, and you have enough bones to be able to survive the town guard. But just one monsters? No. But maybe that's not enough. You could maybe want to add slimes or rats. And now suddenly you have 3 waves of EXP in order to absolutely decimate the next wave that comes. I have to say, at first, none of these waves in between the main waves are guaranteed. They only have a chance of showing up. So you just put even more into the upgrade tree until it's practically guaranteed in every playthrough. As an idea, this fucking slaps! This fucking slaps. And this kind of like thoughtful design for how the game progresses. It just did the unthinkable when I started this. It made me like something more than the Sorks taste. You know, if you forgive me for being sacrilege in the video, me. I liked all these games, but as of writing this script, this is the only one I'm still playing in my downtime, like legit. I played it last night as of writing this. And if you really are only going to go for one of these games in this video, it's like, let it be this one. This is it. This is saying nothing of the card game within a game that seems to be a staple of these Coastware titles, or the 2 secret classes in which you can summon meanies and monsters respectively in place of your skeleton dudes. I haven't even gotten round to doing the latter class yet. Also, the vibes are just immaculate. I love this fits onto a GBA screen pixelated style with just enough detail to imply your creations are just horrific, and the dreamlike quality of the soundtrack which backs this up. It can switch from atmospheric to chill to just downright joyful at times, in contrast to what is probably happening. It really puts you into the mind of your Bone Riser is so gone in the art of necromancy that the act of removing an entire population from a kingdom is just a fever dream induced typical Thursday. Also, it's gotta be said, having these games match aesthetically with something else makes the little pattern recognition part of my autistic brain go brrr. I will simply now be buying this developer's entire catalog. Whoops. As I said before, my favourite thing about going on this little endeavour is the conversations these things have with the source text. And while I liked all these games, the big takeaway is just reminds me how much the original Vampire source is just so delish. I think even some of Vampire's like biggest cheerleaders look at its passive nature and acts like it's something to be enjoyed in spite of itself. A guilty pleasure that when falling for the pretty slot machine lights at the Butlins arcade. Because the lights go blink and the treasure chest has a little song sometimes, and the song is sometimes longer, but only sometimes. But I think this is such a discredit for the thought that has clearly gone into Vampire's design. Because when these little changes are made in its contemporaries, I do feel like the source loses a little bit of its flavour in exchange for nothing. It's only when you get a game like Bone Riser, which demonstrates an intimate familiarity with what works with the source text, are you able to make huge changes to the formula but retain the delish flavour. And I hope this isn't the last time we get to make a little video like this about this new unique subgenre. I hope so many more people take a stab at this and see sort of like what comes out. Because if you lot start making them, I'm going to be playing them for 7 million years. Now, time to start our collage. Obviously we're going to be going into the idea of like a survival game as like a very vague determiner means. Well, I'm not quite sure how to lay out this. I think it's just going to be multi-parted. I think we're just going to have this part in the forest is going to be our vampire survivor likes, but maybe there'll also be a beach and a mountain. But I inevitably cover stuff like Lost in Blue or the many Steam survival games and stuff like that. So for now, let's just let's